I've had much ado to say about victim consciousness and narcissism in the last few episodes. It's been a running theme in my life. It's the lens that's kind of filtered over my eyes at the moment. And it's an incredibly interesting topic because the more that I see it within myself, the more I see it around. And I keep calling it a victim narcissism dichotomy, but I think it's all victim consciousness. It's just different manifestations of it. And I keep going back to what Eckhart Tolle says about victim complexes or victim consciousness, and it's all ultimately a superiority complex. Now, that's getting a little bit into the spiritual esoteric side, but in a way, it ultimately is. Because if life bothers you and everything's a problem, and you are effectively a victim of everything in life around you, then you're making yourself special. And I talked about that in previous episodes as well. And so this specialness, whether it's through the victim or the narcissist, it is this separation from humanity. It's one thing to feel special, it's another to feel unique. And uniqueness is what we all have. We are all different from one another. But specialness is that I am deserving of something more. And the victim consciousness is very different than a momentary victim, um, momentary sort of victim mindset, and that's the often the term that gets thrown around is a victim mindset, which is the mind getting into kind of a default slippery mode, a little bit of lacking resilience in a moment where you need to play it out to the end. It's like a minute left in a game and you're behind 2 points and you're just like, I'm not going to win, so I might as well not bother trying. And you're kind of missing the point. It's to play the game. It's to have fun. And it's too much attachment to the outcome. It's too much of an attachment of whether or not you're going to win. I see that in sports teams all the time and certain fan bases. Sometimes people get very discouraged when whether or not a team is going to win. And, of course, winning is fun, winning is enjoyable, but it sort of loses the point of the camaraderie and connection of the fact that you're all playing a game. And in life, we sort of lose the sense that we're playing a game. All of this is a game. We're all just trying to navigate it the best we can. And a game in the sense that it's not, it is a competition, but a lot of people have an unhealthy relationship to competition where they assume it's a dog eat dog, it's about destroying each other. But when you're in it together, a competition is fun. A competition is about testing each other. It's about playing. It's about being silly. It's the three-legged potato sack race. You're not doing it to like prove skill. You're doing it so that you fall down and it's funny, right? And the victim consciousness is like falling down and it's not funny. There's a levity that's not there. It's a gravity that everything that happens to you is a bane on your existence. And that's ultimately what it is this feeling of everything is happening to me. And that puts you at the center of attention. That's why it's a superiority complex. And so even though you are feeling and saying, or having had been a victim at some point, you are carrying that identity with you to 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 use it as a means for saying that I am deserving of a free pass or a buy or some some semblance of explicit attention. And again, with the victim mentality, it's like easy for people to look at others and say like, you're a victim, you're stop being that, you know and I think ultimately it's tougher for us to see it within ourselves, right? I even flinch a little bit as I'm using the word victim because I know that someone listening is probably might have clicked off within the first minute because the word victim and narcissism are both sort of weaponized words, but it's one of those things that they trigger each other because it's the same thing. Non-duality is sort of that idea. It's like realizing, no, this is actually one thing that is being split into two and assumed to be two different things. It's like doubt. There's really no such thing as doubt. It's just trust. And doubt is just putting your trust in something else. And it's always about where you're putting your trust, right? So it's just, there's singular things. It's where you're putting your attention. It's where you're putting your trust. And in the case of victim consciousness, it's about how your relationship to being a victim. And at some point, again, you may have been a victim. And particularly when it comes to complex trauma, I don't want to say this without compassion. It may be a situation where that just happened over a long period of time, and it did become a part of your identity to be a victim because you were a victim for a long time. So you approach life with this sense of, getting attention when you're hurt might be something that pervades you towards being negative. And it is this kind of negativity. Everything's a problem. Everything is the result of trying to, why does this always happen to me? Is kind of that idea. So how do we start to let go of this? If you want more specifics on the diagnostic part of it, I think it's the last few episodes are good. I will say this to further flesh out the narcissism victim part of it. Again, I think it's all one thing, because what the narcissist is typically doing is repressing that they've been a victim, right? And they're not feeling their sadness or their grief or frustration or whatever the feeling is. They're pushing it down. They're saying, I'm not a victim. I will never be a victim. And I'm going to do everything I can to be at the top of the totem pole. And that gets into grandiosity. That gets into what Carl Jung calls inflation. And we create this inflated sense of self. I call it this like Jackie Chan fantasy that a lot of dudes have, that like if 3 dudes came into my apartment, I will Jackie Chan the shit out of them, or I'll be able to grab my gun and take care of it. It's like, well, reality is going to be a very different story. Have you ever seen 2 men fight, like actually fight, not in a boxing match where they have a ton of skill, but like two young men outside of a high school? It's like two jackrabbits fighting, or deer, just like fists just flying everywhere, and it's real awkward and kind of hilarious. So when we get into real life situations, our imagination keeps us protected, and in a lot of ways the narcissist has a very big imagination that keeps them protected, and they navigate life in a way to which they avoid any reminder or semblance that they have been a victim, or that life is potentially hard. They're avoiding difficulty. And that's what the victim also does. So they're a repression of each other. The victim just doesn't own that they have a superiority complex. The narcissism kind of owns that they have a superiority complex. What they're not owning is the victim part of it. So they're repressing being a victim, and then there are people who own being a victim. And either way, it's all this sort of victim dance, so to speak. So how do we let go of this? Well, it's big, heavy work. It's really hard. First of all, it's important to know that a lot of it has to do with shame. So again, if you're embracing being the victim, you might have a superiority complex, and you might be you might be avoiding shame by focusing on other emotions that don't have anything to do with shame. And if you're the narcissist, or you're someone that is like the covert narcissist who is prone to using the sort of victim as a weapon, the victim mindset or the victim mentality as a weapon, and saying like, no, I'm never good at anything. I won't amount to anything. Nobody likes me. Nobody will approve of me. It's almost like leaning into the core fear for a lot of this, which is rejection and abandonment, and leaning in and using it as a means to say, I will never be loved, and no one will like me, and almost like keeping that illusion alive by continuing to push it forward amongst other people. And so that is easy for that person to start to say like, oh, I am a narcissist, or they find out they're a covert narcissist and say like, oh, that's something I should feel shame about. And so they use that as, again, a shame spiral. And the point is to not feel shame. That's not the antidote I'm saying here. The point is that shame is the whole problem. Shame, there's a shame in there about who you are and being our authentic self. So having to mask that with some sort of grandiosity that the world is out to get me in some way, shape, or form. And so shame is, I wouldn't say something to avoid, but shame is something to not spiral into. And this stuff requires help. This stuff requires um, probably some clinical trauma help, not from someone like me who's a coach if you're dealing with this, um, but from someone who is really focused on this sort of stuff. Like I've talked about Tim Fletcher. He's really particularly focused on this. And he's been on some podcasts. He's got great in-depth YouTube videos. Certainly take a look at that. But in my case, I suspect I fall into the covert narcissist camp. I mean, my book is laden with it, and which you can check out if you want. It's called Happy Chemicals, a neurotic memoir, and that memoir is really about diving into that victim consciousness, that covert narcissism. And so you can approach it from either direction, really. You can call it covert narcissism, you can call it owning the victim, whatever it is you want to do. And so I wrote it in that book, and that's been my story. And that's what I'm learning to be letting go of. And it is letting go. It's letting go of self-focus, which is why I've sort of been talking on this podcast kind of at you or to you. It actually helps me to not just spiral. And I do have episodes on this podcast where I've sort of documented my spiraling in a way. And I think it's I wouldn't say it's fairly common, but I think it's given a lot of credence. There is an episode of Survivor, or the new season of Survivor. There's the guy Andy. He is, I think, an exhibitor of covert narcissism. And there are two dominant reactions to that. One, it's to feed it, which is to say oh no, you're not a problem. No, we'll take care of you. And it's it rewards it with attention. And then there's the other reaction, which is someone gets angry and maybe they feel like that person is exploiting their strategy and is revealing something that they've repressed within themselves. And so it really depends on it really depends on your reaction to that. But Andy's a good example on Survivor. An example of the classic narcissist is Kevin from Kevin Can Fuck Himself. That's on Netflix. And then also the Vince McMahon documentary. I'm convinced that Vince McMahon, maybe even Donald Trump, have classic narcissism. And I don't say that without compassion, because that's usually based on some sort of childhood trauma. And I guess that's the biggest thing to know here too. It's based on a childhood trauma, and that's where the shame comes in. The shame comes in from having experienced something that puts you into a victim state, and you sort of deny that you were a victim, and that's what leads to the narcissism. I was going somewhere and I kind of lost it, but effectively what I want to say is for me, as recognizing the covert narcissism, I think for me, I'm starting to first of all see how much I'm putting the attention on myself, how much I do that in my direct relationships, how much I do that in public, and to a degree that's overly skewed. Even in conversations where I'm just talking about my day, how much maybe I will lean on what's going wrong, or I will lean on almost crossing an emotional boundary by sharing too much, getting into too much depth, right? And the challenge here too is that the feeling of spiraling is something you have to get to know intimately. You have to notice it to feel what it's like. It does feel like this sort of drooping. You almost notice your body language gets smaller and shrinking a little bit, especially when things get quiet. You get kind of small. If you watch the Vince McMahon documentary, you kind of notice him do that. When he talks about certain subjects and then things get quiet, it's almost like he deflates. It's kind of funny. There's the term inflation, right? You become grandiosity. You're a big, larger than life, projected person. And then when you're not doing that anymore, the subtle energy is that you sort of deflate, and everything sort of, your physical body sort of drifts down a little bit. And then your mentality also drifts kind of negatively. And it's a lot of self-blame. I get into these spirals of I'm not good enough. No one likes me. Molly's going to leave me. Um, I can't get anything right. Um, all of this stuff that probably happened as a result of either being modeled it by a parent or uh, having experienced that when you were a kid, where you just felt like you couldn't get anything right, or you couldn't get properly accepted, or didn't get the attention that you needed. Maybe both your parents were thinkers, or and were not very warm and affectionate, or they were distant, or something like that. Something effectively was missing, and those specifics are for you to discover for yourself. But ultimately, it is about, like, first of all, noticing. So if you're just trying to prevent the spiral, that's just more repression, right? And that's going to come back to haunt you. That's going to be a pressure valve release at some point. It's just noticing it. It's being aware, okay, I'm spiraling right now, and I'm dysregulated right now, or I'm talking about myself a lot right now. In the case of this podcast, I'm just sort of using it as an example. But I think ultimately it is about letting yourself go. I've talked about this on this podcast also, that one of the best things a lot of us can do for our mental health is to stop focusing on our mental health, um, and to stop spiraling about it, to, like, kind of let go, and to focus on it when it's appropriate and give it some attention, like morning journaling or evening journaling. Check in with yourself. Don't abandon yourself, but at the same time, to be constantly in your head and spiraling and focusing on, like, especially when it's about laced in judgment. There are basically two key approaches, I think, to mental health. It's what's going on with me, and then what's wrong with me. And really, it's, if you fundamentally start from one place or the other, things are going to go, everything you place on top of it is going to be layered by those two questions: what's going on with me, or what's wrong with me. And the what's wrong with me is very clearly judgment. It's putting myself into an inferior position. My favorite quote is, um, what makes you so special that you're not worthy of love, right? And when we're making all these self-judgments about ourselves, we're instantly putting ourselves into a place where we're not worthy of love. And I said this to Molly the other day. Hopefully I can remember it verbatim as I'm talking here, but I think it's something to the degree of rebelling God. And I don't mean that in a religious sense. When I say God, I mean it as like a shorthand for existence, for the universe, for nature, for all of the just happenings of life. And for some reason, we just have these ego-laden desires to think that we're better than all of existence. And we are effectively, when we're saying that we're not worthy of love, we're deciding something on behalf of existence. Love is something we can all have access to. It's sort of like a pervading dimensional force in a way. And we tune ourselves to it, or we tune ourselves out of it. And when we get into this shame spiral, we perpetually tune ourselves out of it. We artificially remove ourselves from access to love, because the default is that when we are in a good place, when we are well resourced, when we're uh, taken care of, and we are food, water, shelter, all the things, then we have access to love. Love and belonging is the third tier on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's safety and security, and I forget the other ones. It's safety and security effectively, and then love and belonging, and shelter, safety, security, love and belonging. Because once you have those taken care of, then you move into love and belonging. That's just by default what we have access to. So the effort becomes in denying ourselves access. And sometimes it's a simple reframe. Sometimes it is saying that question of like, okay, not what's wrong with me, what's going on, and to stop sort of poking at ourselves. That's one big challenge we have today with pathologizing of everything, with ADHD, autism, when we're looking for a reason to say that I'm special in some way versus, simply what's going on, right? I think if you recognize that you have something like ADHD or autism or something like that, there's really no reason to advertise it, and I think that's the difference, is like there's a benefit to advertising it versus like just embodying it and saying, these are the adjustments I need to make. When we're advertising it, we're kind of wanting others to make an adjustment for us. It's sort of like this king walking through a court, and you want everyone to clear your path, clear the path for you, versus like embodying it and saying, okay, I have ADHD, or in my case, I have an audio processing situation. And so I just need to be aware of how much audio I'm taking in, how much, when I start to get a headache, I need to ease off. When I'm doing too much reading, I need to ease off. Noticing what's going on with me and then making the adjustment to the way that I work or my schedule or, things like that. And if it does require me to communicate that I need a different circumstance, then again, it all comes down to my responsibility, right? So what's going on is a matter of taking responsibility versus what's wrong with me is saying like, I need others to accommodate for me. And it's a little bit of both, but it's mostly taking some sort of personal responsibility because everyone's focused on themselves and they're living their life and they're doing their thing. And it's unreasonable to ask the world to stop for you, right? But the paradox of that is also needing help. So you do need help. You do need support. You do need to be able to ask for people to come to your aid. And so it isn't personal responsibility to the point of being alone. It's not isolating, because again, that's like a shame reaction of just saying like, oh, I don't want to burden anyone with this. It's not about not being a burden. Personal responsibility is also including asking for help. It also includes having a community around you of people who are going to help you and understand your circumstance and support you in that circumstance. It's not about being a burden, and it's not about shame. And I think those are some of the key words. It's rejection, abandonment, being a burden, and feeling shame. And the shame can come from feeling like you're not supposed to exist. I'm not worthy of living. I'm not worthy of love. I'm not worthy of attention. I'm not worthy of help. Like you're deciding all of these things. And again, it may be coming from complex trauma. It may be coming from when you're a child. I mean, in my circumstance, I got a lot of messaging that I was special. But I had a lot of actions that counteracted that, getting beat with a belt and stuff like that. Particularly in moments that I can remember where it was most definitely not my fault that something happened, and I still got in trouble for it anyway. And so there was a lot of words not matching actions, and that led to this feeling of not feeling worthy or feeling like a burden. And so, there is some degree of like knowing what happened and being able to process it. That's the complex, trauma part of it. And doing that with support, and at the same time recognizing that that's just simply not true, that was a mistake that happened. That was every child is worthy and deserving of love and attention and affection, and just because you didn't get it doesn't mean you weren't worthy. It just might mean that your parent wasn't capable, or that the circumstance wasn't able to provide that, whether that's culturally, socially, generationally, in your city, in your town, because of your parents' own trauma and upbringing. Like, often this passes down, the narcissism bit in particular. And, you were a victim of that situation, and it stays there. You don't carry that with you and start to now move towards finding that love of, first of all, accepting yourself. Acceptance is a big part of all of this, accepting that you are inherently lovable, you are inherently loved, and unconditional love exists beyond just what someone does or doesn't do for you and what you do or don't do for someone else. I mean, there are conditions to relationships, right? There are boundaries, right? There are things you can or cannot do in relationships that, like, no one has to stay. But, and I mean, honestly, no one will stay. And because everyone dies. That's just another reality we have to face. That's something I felt like I was facing yesterday, actually, talking to Molly. Most of the songs or movies that I feel a personal sort of strong emotional reaction to is songs about letting go, or the ends of movies, or moving on, end of life kind of stuff. And there is a degree of, like, accepting that, like, yeah, people leave. We let go, we move on, we move forward, there are new things. And not seeing that as abandonment, right? They're not leaving me. Again, that's putting me at the center of attention, right? They're not leaving me. They're leaving because of them, or because of life, or because of the nature of things, right? They're not leaving me. So again, that's another way of distancing myself from being the center of attention, and saying, like, it's not that they're leaving me. They're just leaving. Or even if it is about a divorce or something like that, it's like they're often leaving because they have to set a boundary. They have to leave for their sake. They're not actually leaving because of you. And again, it's putting ourselves into the position of, like, what did I do wrong? Because it's this belief or this feeling that if I just do the right things, if I say the right things, then everyone will just stay with me forever and ever and ever. And that's just not how it works. It's just an acceptance of reality not being that way. And that, I think, that starts from creating a distance between self and other. And really, it is creating an effective boundary between self and other. There is this certain merged quality of everyone is me, or everyone belongs with me or to me, and releasing some of that is pretty powerful. There's a humility angle to this too. It's being humble to the notion that life isn't about me. I'm here to be of service to it, and to benefit from it. I'm part of the reciprocal cycle of life, but life is not happening to me, at me, or for me necessarily. I'm not the center of attention. I am just a part of the rhythm and flow of it all. And there are still plenty of things I'm working through. So releasing is a challenge. One of the biggest things, actually, is feeling sadness. And feeling sadness and actual grief is very different than feeling shame. Again, shame puts me at the center of attention. Sadness is the release of cortisol. It's the release of the burden. It's the release of this feeling that it's all about me. Sadness is usually like releasing of the longing or the grief of something, or just recognizing that something has passed. And I think when it comes to complex trauma or something that happened as a child, The sadness is the release of saying, yeah, that happened. And it sucks that that happened. And I can feel it that that happened. And I want to not necessarily repress it and leave it there, but I want to feel it on behalf of that child who didn't feel it at the moment, who couldn't feel it at the moment, who wasn't aware of how to feel it at the moment. I mean, there's definitely a stoic part of me that I don't think I know how to feel sadness just to feel it. I think there are some people who are really good at that. I usually need a prompt. Again, I need like music, or I need a movie, or I need something to really get me into that state. And I know often when I'm dysregulated, sometimes I do need to feel the sadness of the dysregulation, not to feed the feeling of being a burden, or feed the feeling of being feeling like it's all my fault, but to just feel the sadness and frustration and then to let it go. There's a great song by Linkin Park called Iridescent, and that's pretty much literally the lyrics as I was saying it. You know, letting it go. Letting go is ultimately about trust. It's about faith. It is about being able to trust in the universe, trust in existence, trust in God, however you want to frame it. And there's a difference between, faith and then faith in existence, faith in the happenings of life, faith that everything's going to unfold as it needs to, right? It's quite the opposite of feeling like everything has a problem. There's a problem with everything. A lot of anxiety is related to control. A lot of millennials, people my age and younger, who are feeling immense anxiety because we have an immense desire for control. Letting go of control is about faith and trust. And again, it's not to such an extreme that you submit to life and you don't take any responsibility. That's not what I'm saying. There is a nuance, there's a balance, there is a middle ground here, that you are still involved in life. And that's exactly what I mean, is like people put a lot of faith in faith. Tim Fletcher talks about this. There's a video that he has about spiritual bypassing, that a lot of people put faith in faith. And they say like, well, if I just pray for what I want, or if I just manifest or visualize what I want, then I'm going to get it. Life doesn't work that way. You're not going to get what you want just because you think about it, or just because you ask for it, or you hope for it. Life's going to unfold as it needs to unfold. And there is a trust that whatever you're moving towards is going to happen. So it may manifest because you put the right actions in place to make it manifest. And it may not, because life has all of its own plans, And so there's a certain trust in that. And there's a joy that releases into the trust of that, I think, personally. And so there's one thing to see the difference of like having control of a situation, watching sports and saying that, like, oof, come on, and just like feeling so invested because what happens reflects your inner state, versus like looking at the awesome moments, like, wow, that guy moves really fast. Wow, that's really happening. The difference again is like focusing on the other versus focusing on yourself. Focusing so much on the feeling that it makes you feel because you're out of control of the situation. And I think that's also because maybe things have gone our way. There might be a spoiled component to it. That surprised me when I watched some of Tim Fletcher's work. I realized that it's not always about just complex trauma. It may actually be that you were a spoiled kid and you got everything you wanted, and by that it made you feel a sense of control. And so having that sense of control pervades your adult life, And it didn't give you the resilience to say that, life just happens and you're not in control of what happens. You don't always get what you want, right? And so there is this degree of the other side of it, where again the narcissist is perhaps someone that overly feels like they have to earn love, or overly has to inflate themselves and create a false sense of status and such like that, and overly permits themselves, give themselves too much permission. The victim who owns being a victim may not give themselves enough permission, but also at the same time may have gotten everything they've wanted from a parent. There may be a degree of having been spoiled and therefore have not been prepared for life. And so everything that goes wrong, elicits a big reaction, elicits a complaint. And so one of the things for me is like the reason I fall more into the narcissism camp is because I often repressed complaining, and I wasn't really aware of how much I would complain. And I remember at some point in my life saying, like, it makes no sense to be angry. It makes no sense to complain. Let me just work hard and do my best. And a lot of things did go my way until it didn't. And then I just started snowballing. And as things get more and more difficult, I find myself saying, like, oh, I don't really know what to do here. And sort of feeling helpless, and maybe not realizing how much I had a lot of help, how lucky I've been, you know. And I don't say that to say that disparagingly to myself, like I'm not capable or anything like that, but that I had a lot of help, and all of this stuff that I assumed was me being like a self-made man and I made my own way. It's like, no, I had a ton of help. My dad had his own advertising business. I had a lot of opportunity to work for him and get a lot of experience. I had introductions to jobs in the past. My parents paid for a decent part of my school in college. Paid for is a question mark, but they certainly took on the burden of it. And all these things that maybe I just didn't recognize were actual benefits, right? If you focus on the negative, you just don't notice the benefits. You don't notice the positives, right? And I see that a lot with narratives around parents, like blaming parents or boomers in general for problems. But, if you're not properly weighing the options of the positives and the negatives, then you're not seeing the full picture. You're cherry picking and creating a narrative of negativity, of everything bad happens to me, when that's not the case at all. I mean, in my life, I've had a lot of amazing people come in and out of my life and have been very helpful to me. I'm grateful for, the women in my life who have spent dedicated time with me. Like, that is something I'm forever grateful for. But they've moved on and they live their own lives and they're doing their own thing. And I'm very happy for them. I think for a long time I wasn't. I was feeling this sense of like, what did I do wrong? Why did they leave me? It's like, no, they left for them. They wanted a different circumstance. They wanted a better situation, and they got it. And that's great. And that's not relative to me. That's not about saying that I'm worse. I mean, maybe at the time, sure, I wasn't the right choice, and that's fine. But I am the right choice for Molly, and I am in the right scenario. So it's also about me finding my thing. And, we're all just navigating life to find the things that we need to find for ourselves. And just as we need to see, it's important to not also ignore the negatives. But if you're just so focused on the negatives, then you miss all of the positives. I mean, the collective narrative around blaming boomers for problems is like really silly, because they were so anti-war. They pushed the civil rights movement. Like, there's just so much that they have contributed to the positives of life, and they've, of course, have negatives. But so do all of us. We've all got challenges, and that's just all it is. Playing a game in life, it's just challenges, and we overcome challenges. That's just what we do. And we do that for each other and with each other. It's not about feeling this sort of shame and helplessness and hopelessness that I will never amount to anything. Maybe you won't amount to the very specific expectations in your mind. That also might need an adjustment. And that might be a part of the inflation and grandiosity, that I'm destined to be X, Y, and Z, and that what I have right now is not good enough. And the other antidote is gratitude. That's part of the humility of it all. And I don't mean this like false gratitude of entrepreneurs use to try to make this, they use gratitude as jet fuel. That's not what I'm saying. Gratitude is simply just like being happy with the present moment. If you're not happy with a coffee, you won't be happy with a yacht. I once told my son, we were at the Renaissance Fair and we were going to go get this, like, there's this wooden weapons stand. And he was like, oh, when I get this axe, I'm going to be so happy. And I'm like, yeah, that's cool. But you can be happy now too. And then when you get the axe, you can be double happy. And he just like got quiet. And I was like, aha, that stuck. It's like everything's perfect as it is. And it's sort of accepting and seeing that. And that includes you. And I don't mean perfect in the ego sense of grandiosity of like, yeah, I'm perfect and nobody else is. No, we all are. We all are perfect in our design. What's happening is perfect as it is. Everything's happening as it needs to happen. Every conflict in the world is happening because it needs to happen. It's all bubbling for some reason. And we can also work towards improving things, right? If we come from a frame that everything is broken, including ourselves, when we say what's wrong with us instead of what's going on with us, then we're perpetually feeling like we're behind the line. We are always trying to catch up. We're always behind. And I just don't think that's a fair way to look at ourselves. We are exactly where we need to be. If we are healing, that's where we need to be. If we need to find help, if we're listening to this podcast, if we are in need of a coach or a mentor or a leader or a guide, great. If we're needing to release negativity, great. And it does start with the acceptance. It starts with noticing and saying, yeah, I do actually shame spiral a lot, and almost taking an objective view of it. It's just taking the witness consciousness and saying like, what's going on with me? Oh yeah, okay, I do spiral. Huh, interesting. And it's taking an observer stance, not a judgment stance. Let go of that critical voice in your mind. The critical voice is, yes, it is trying to help you. It just wants you to improve. It wants you to be safe. It's not trying to end your life, but it can consequently be very hurtful. You need to be kinder to yourself and let go of that voice and recognize whose voice that actually is. That's not yours. There's no reason for you to actually be unkind to yourself, to whip yourself into shape. Like, there's nothing wrong. You can improve, but there's nothing wrong. So let all of that go. Humility is important. Being of service to others is important. Recognizing this is all a game and you can have fun. You're allowed to have fun. Let yourself have fun. It's not about the outcomes. It's the process of life. It's the moments with our partner. It's the moments with our friends. It's the moment where we get to wake up and be of service, or to go to the gym, to have self-care and to drink some water. You ever have those moments where drinking water is like the greatest thing in the world? Enjoy all of that. It's hard to do that in every single moment of every single day. But the tendency we have also is to notice it in others and to want to correct others. That doesn't do anything. Just be a better example of it and put that energy into the world. And you will start to feel it. You will start to feel a lightness. You will start to feel like, it's letting go, right? It's shedding weight. It's lightening up. Lightening up is just saying, like, okay, man, the world's not a disaster. It's going to be messy, and life is messy, but it's beautiful, and let it be that way. I think I covered everything I wanted to cover here. There's like a little sticky note in my brain I can't find that feels like there's a little more that needs to be said, but I do want to put this topic out to pasture. I think it's something that I want to move on from. I want to release and let go. I think for me personally right now, it is continuing to feel sadness. And sadness is different from shame. Sadness is just like the feeling. Shame is like, I am the cause of this feeling. I am the me, me. It's like, stop. You're not the center of the universe. Back off. Like, you're not that important. You are important, but you're not that important. You know what I mean? I think that's the thing. And I don't know. Let me know what you think about all of that. If that's something that means something to you. It's important to me. I think it's just all these little insidious ways that I'm actually putting myself at the center of attention. I need to back off of that. So, all that said, I appreciate you for listening. Honestly, I don't know where this podcast goes. There's a whole back catalog of stuff. I have ideas what I want to do with the catalog. I have other projects. If you go to letsgocnote.substack.com, you can check out the other projects I have there. The ITP problem, personality strategy. I keep getting subscribers to those two, so I might put more attention into that. The developmental digest. I do some game streaming sometimes. I'm kind of figuring out what's next. But for now, doing this podcast has felt pretty good to get this off my chest and to share some of this with you. So I guess just as a quick recap, the self-focus and narcissism is ultimately about it's all a victim complex. It's all potentially complex trauma, which it's complex. It's typically, at least for me in my circumstance, it's rejection and abandonment, fear and shame, and putting myself at the center of attention. And the antidotes for me so far have been just noticing it, recognizing that this is all a game. Just play the game. Don't worry about the outcomes. Do your best, and detach your identity from always being a victim. Noticing complaints, noticing when everything is, kind of like the Eckhart Tolle thing of everything is a problem, because it's like the king saying, like, how dare life do this to me? Just noticing that kind of thing, and then gratitude and humility, being grateful for what you have, humility that I am in need of help and I can't do all of this on my own, and that I also bring a gift to existence, that I am here to serve, and that I can find ways to serve, and that when I am shame spiraling and in my own head, often what I need to do is find a way to focus on getting out of my head somehow. I podcast with others. Molly and I have a podcast called Behind the Studio Door, And yesterday morning, I was spiraling quite a bit. And once we got on the microphone, I just was able to focus on them and say, like, this is Molly's darling of a podcast. Our friend Stromy, who produces with us and also talks, is someone that is bringing a lot of joy, and we have a lot of similarities, which is really great, and is able to help me get out of my head. And so ultimately, getting out of your own head at the right moments is pretty helpful too. Not just dissociating, but like finding a way to be of service is ultimately fulfilling. And I guess the last thing is to look up Tim Fletcher's 12 needs. I think those are really powerful, that when you're feeling dysregulated, to recognize, first of all, when you're feeling dysregulated, what triggers you to get kind of down and change your mood, and to notice which needs you are in need of. Are you in need of creative expression? Are you in need of hugs, love, physical affection, sex, a sense of purpose, or just simply pleasure? Do you need a cookie? you know, yeah, the 12 needs are really powerful to get to know. And his work has the deeper dive in all of this. I'm not a specialist in this, so don't come to me for this kind of work. uh, I'm actually going to be shifting towards, like, if there's anything personality related, I think that's stuff where I could probably be a little more helpful. And so with that said, go ahead and come follow me over at personalitystrategy.substack.com if you want that stuff. The intpproblem.substack.com is INTP specific. Thinking of doing some stuff that's Enneagram related as well on personality strategy, and seeing where that goes. So I appreciate you for listening. I am C Note, aka Christian Rivera, and take care of yourself. Go do something. Get out of your head and take good care of yourself. All right. I'll catch you next time. See ya.